He texted me from Paris. Said the view was breathtaking. Said he missed me. Said next time let's go together. I didn't answer. I was in Boston in the boardroom, signing the one document that would make sure there'd be no next time. He went to Paris with his mistress. I sold the company he thought he owned. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. We started the company together, NeuroSync. He had the idea, I had the science. Back then he was just Nicholas, a former patient with too many migraines and too many dreams. We'd sit up late, him sketching logos on napkins, me explaining how neurons rewired under trauma. People said we made a good team. Maybe we did. We weren't married yet, but it felt like a marriage, the long hours, the shared bank accounts, the quiet glances over coffee when an investor finally said yes. When he proposed, he didn't have a ring. He handed me the first contract we ever signed, circled our names and said, "You've always been my partner." I believed him. For years, I stayed off the stage. Let him be the face. Let him take the mic. Let him smile and speak in sound bites while I ran trials, wrote protocols, filed patents. People assumed I was the supportive wife who tagged along. They never knew I held 51% of the company because I never said it. I didn't need to. We were building something together. And when Elodie came bright, young, perfect French vowels, I thought she was just another hire, just another PR rebrand. "She's sharp," he said. "She'll help us go global." And she did. The press loved her. Nicholas, even more so. But I still stayed quiet. I still believed we had different roles but the same foundation. Until one morning, he asked me not to come to the Zurich conference. Said it would be more efficient if just he and Elodie went. Then 3 months later, he asked me to skip Paris too. "Too many cooks," he said. "Just let me handle this one." That's when I started noticing the scent on his coat. The hotel bookings that didn't match the itinerary, the new cufflinks engraved with initials that weren't mine. Still, I didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't even cry. I opened the ledger instead. And there she was, every charge, every upgrade, every single cent on my name. That was the moment something in me went still. Not broken, just still, because if he could spend my money to build a future with someone else, then I could use my silence to end that future before it began. The first time I noticed her perfume was in my car, passenger seat, leather still warm. He said he took a client to lunch, said it was just pho in the South End, but Nicholas hated cilantro. He never forgot to mention it. And I never wore Dior, but the smell stayed long after he was gone. Jasmine, musk, sharp, young. I didn't say anything. Just rolled the window down and drove in silence. The second time was during a product review meeting. The team had just finalized the Phase 2 results. A big win. I should have been in that room, but I wasn't on the calendar. He told me it was a tight group, that my role was too operational for the branding angle they were testing. So I watched from the hallway. Through the glass, I saw her Elodie standing next to him, her hand lightly resting on his elbow as he pointed at slides I had built, data I had validated, words I had drafted. And he didn't flinch. He didn't step away. He didn't even look around. I stood there longer than I should have. One of the junior analysts passed me, smiled awkwardly, but said nothing. Later that day, Nicholas came into my office, dropped a stack of paperwork on my desk without looking up. "Need you to check these by Monday." His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, smiled, turned the phone face down. That night, I asked if he wanted to go to dinner. We hadn't eaten out in weeks. He said he was tired, said he had a sinus headache, went straight to bed. But his shirt was still tucked in, and his socks didn't match. He always matched. I lay awake next to him, counting the breaths between lies. Not because I was angry, not yet. But because I had a strange feeling something had shifted. Not broken, not loud. Just off, like a metronome skipping every third beat. Just enough to make the song feel wrong. The investor dinner was always our thing. Every quarter we'd host it together. He'd work the room all charm and vision. I'd sit quietly with the scientist translating the research into something board-friendly. But this time I wasn't invited. It's just informal, Nicholas said. Mostly PR and branding people. You'd hate it. I didn't argue, just nodded, watched him button his cufflinks. The new pair, mother of pearl, subtle engraving, not my gift. He left without asking if I needed anything. Didn't kiss my cheek like usual. Didn't even look back. Later that night I stopped by the office, just to grab a file, or maybe just to see what it felt like when he wasn't there. The lights were off in the lounge, but the conference room door was cracked. I heard laughter, soft, intimate, two voices, hers and his. She was saying something about how careful we have to be. And he just chuckled in that low voice he once saved for me. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to hear her ask, "Do you think she suspects anything?" He didn't answer. Or maybe he did. I just couldn't make out the words. Didn't want to. The next morning he brought me coffee from my favorite place, just how I like it, almond milk, no sugar. I took it, smiled, said thank you, and wondered how long he'd been trying to keep me quiet with the things he used to give with love. Because love, real love, doesn't replace your presence with a to-go cup. It doesn't erase your voice from rooms you helped build. It doesn't forget you were there first. It started with a receipt, folded, stuck between 2 pages of our quarterly strategy printout. A Paris suite, 5 nights, charged to the corporate account. I wasn't scheduled to be in Paris, neither was he, officially. But the billing date matched the same week he told me he was doing off-site planning with the R&D team in Vermont. There was no Vermont trip, and there definitely wasn't a board-approved international booking. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, a test run, or something LOD had mishandled. But then I opened the shared drive, the one she thought I didn't check anymore. There it was, a folder labeled Press Materials, Paris, inside mock-ups for a photo shoot, draft captions, one line in her handwriting: "Nicholas prefers soft light by the balcony." I stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something I already knew. He wasn't hiding well, he didn't need to. Because he thought I wasn't looking anymore. Later that evening I received an email, meant for her team, forwarded to me by mistake. The subject line, "For review before Monday, post-trip wrap draft." The message: "We'll say the Paris trip was client-based. Push the narrative of European expansion. Keep her out of the official media, but post light behind the scenes on launch day. Nicholas says she won't ask." She, not Dr. Wakefield, not Sienna, just she. Like I was some ghost they shared a budget with. I didn't reply, didn't forward it, didn't flag it to H. I just printed it, all of it, stapled it behind the receipt. Then opened a fresh file on my encrypted drive. Named it Transition Strategy, Phase 0. Because sometimes before you burn a bridge, you build the new one in silence. Brick by careful brick, until one day they look up and you're already gone with the ground beneath them. There was a time when he couldn't sleep unless my hand was on his back. I used to wake up at 2 a.m., pressing my palm between his shoulder blades just to settle his breath. He never said thank you. He didn't need to. Back then, I thought love meant showing up in all the ways no one sees. And maybe that was true once, but last week I stood at the elevator watching him walk LOD to her car. He opened the door, touched her elbow, leaned in just enough. Not inappropriate, not obvious. But not the man who used to whisper my name in the dark like it was the only thing keeping him together. I didn't cry, I just stepped back. Let the elevator doors close without calling his name. That night, I took the backup files from our shared archive, pulled the early investment agreements, reread the clause about executive misconduct and fiduciary misappropriation. Then I made a list of board members, of legal contacts, of every favor I'd ever earned but never used. It was longer than I expected. People remember quiet women who never asked for credit. But they remember even more when she finally does. That was the moment. Not when he lied, not when she left. But when I realized I didn't need him to lose, he only needed me to stop covering for him. It started with a dinner, not a confrontation, not a scene, just a quiet reservation under another name at a quiet corner of a private club where no one wore name tags. 3 of the board members arrived before me. All of them had once admired Nicholas, but all of them had also sent me quiet glances over the years, the kind of glances that say, "You deserve more credit than you get." I laid out the papers, receipts, the forwarded email from Elodie, flight itineraries paid with company funds, and one more thing, a voice memo from an analyst who overheard Nicholas say Sienna was more of a legacy asset than a current contributor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for loyalty. I asked for accountability. They didn't promise anything, but they didn't walk away either. That night, I went home and activated the clause. Emergency Restructuring Vote Board initiated executive shift. Nicholas wouldn't see it coming, not because I was smarter, but because he had stopped watching me long ago. I used to beg him to review our filings, to slow down and pay attention. Now he had trained himself to trust that I'd always be the safety net. So he let go, and I let him. When he boarded the plane to Paris, I sent one final internal memo. It was addressed to Legal, Finance, and Operations subject line Transition Preparation. Contingency Protocols. Short, clean, clear. By the time he was over the Atlantic, every system was moving without him. The boardroom was quiet. Not tense, just still. Every chair was filled, except his. Nicholas was in Paris, probably sipping Bordeaux on a balcony he didn't pay for. The meeting started at 900 a.m. sharp. No presentations, no theatrics. Just the legal officer reading the motion aloud. Proposal to restructure executive leadership in accordance with Section 14C of the bylaws. I watched their faces, some blank, some resigned, some quietly satisfied. It wasn't just about Elodie. It was about years of arrogance, of skipping meetings, of asking for trust but refusing to offer transparency. The first vote came from Diane. She had served with us since the first Series A. She looked at me, then said softly, "In favor." Then came William, "In favor." Then Simon, "In favor." Each name, each word, a weight lifted. When it reached my turn, I didn't hesitate. "In favor." That made 5 out of 7, enough to pass. The General Counsel made a note. Effective immediately, Nicholas Wakefield is removed as Chief Executive Officer of NeuroSync. There was no applause, no reaction. Just a quiet rustle as people closed folders and pushed back their chairs. I remained seated. Let them leave first. Because I wasn't done yet, the paperwork would take 48 hours. The press release would go out Monday. His company email would deactivate at midnight. By the time his plane landed, he'd still be wearing the title, but it wouldn't belong to him anymore. I opened my laptop, typed one final internal memo. To all staff, interim leadership will be announced Monday. All operations remain unaffected. Short, clean, unmistakable. I didn't need anyone to panic, just prepare. He called at 3:47 a.m. Boston time. Paris sunrise behind him reflected in the hotel window. I didn't answer. The first voicemail was short. "Hey, weird email just came through. Can you check what's going on?" The second was sharper. "Sienna, why is my access restricted? I can't get into the system." The third, anger. "What the hell is this? Call me back now." I didn't. Instead, I sat at my desk, lit only by the desk lamp and the glow of the legal signature confirmation that had just come through. One by one, I watched the locks click shut. Company card frozen. Executive email disabled. Press release scheduled. Interim CEO announcement drafted and approved. At 9:12 a.m., his name was removed from the website. At 9:13, he noticed. He sent a final message. One line. no punctuation. You really did this. I read it twice, then deleted it. No reply. That evening, he called one of the board members. She declined. Then he called our general counsel. They referred him to external PR. He didn't call me again, not that day. 2 days later, he landed in Boston. The same car picked him up from the airport. Same driver we always used. But the office wasn't the same. Security badge denied. His desk cleared, his access void. He stood outside the glass doors, looking in like a man visiting a museum he used to own. I didn't meet him, didn't walk down, didn't wave, just watched from the upper floor window, one hand resting lightly on the edge of my office chair. The chair he used to sit in when he still thought I wouldn't move without his permission. He was wrong. I didn't need his permission, just his signature, and I already had that. Nicholas showed up at my house 2 days later. I didn't buzz him in. He waited at the gate for over an hour. The security system logged his presence. I watched from the upstairs hallway, a quiet mug of tea in my hand, while he stood there shifting his weight, checking his phone, checking again. He looked smaller, not just tired, not just older, but deflated like someone who had finally run out of stories to tell. Eventually, he slipped a white envelope into the mailbox and left. Inside, a handwritten letter, 3 pages, no apologies, just confusion, just a man trying to understand how the woman he underestimated became the woman who ended him. I didn't write back. By then, the media had picked it up. A sudden power shift at NeuroSync. Co-founder quietly ousts CEO, husband. Is this the most elegant divorce in tech? The company trended, so did my name, and then hers. Elodie went live on a private channel, posted a 2-minute video. Tears in her eyes, a soft blanket behind her. None of this was my intention, she said. I didn't know he was still married. I didn't know I was being used. Please stop sending me hate. The comments were brutal. Screenshots surfaced. Captions from their secret Paris trip. Hotel bookings. An invoice with her name and Nicholas's signature. She turned off comments after 12 hours, deleted her socials the next day. By Friday, she had resigned. No statement, just vanished. Nicholas, however, didn't vanish. He booked interviews, pitched articles, tried to set the record straight. But no one listened, because no one wants to hear from the man who lost everything to the woman they once called the quiet half of the company. I never replied to his email, or the second, or the voice message where he asked to meet just one more time. There was no one more time. There was only what came next. He waited outside the NeuroSync building for 3 mornings in a row, same navy coat, same silence. Staff walked past him, some nodded politely. Most didn't look at him at all. On the 4th morning, I walked out. Not because I had anything left to say, but because he had stopped leaving. We sat at the same cafe where we'd signed our first client. He looked older, paler, still trying to smile like it might undo the last 3 weeks. He asked if I hated him. I said no. He asked if there was any way back. I said that wasn't a question I needed to answer anymore. He tried to explain. Said the company changed him, said LOD filled a gap that I'd grown too distant to notice. I didn't flinch. I let him speak, and when he was done, I took out a small envelope and slid it across the table. Inside a printed copy of the document he signed the day he left for Paris. He looked down at his own signature, then back at me. So this was always the plan. I nodded, not cruelly, not proudly. Just truthfully. He stared at it for a long time, then leaned back and exhaled a deep, empty sound like someone finally accepting they'd been outplayed by someone they stopped seeing as a player. He stood to leave, said I should have never underestimated you. I didn't say thank you, didn't say goodbye. I just looked at him the way I once used to, back when we were equals, and for the first time in years, he looked away first. I didn't rebuild NeuroSync. I let it go. It was never really mine anymore, not after years of being told I was too clinical or not media-friendly enough. Instead, I opened something smaller, quieter, a neuro research foundation fully independent, focused on early-stage women-led projects. I named it after my mother. She never understood what I did, but she always asked, "Does it help people?" Now I can say yes. The press moved on after a while. The headlines faded. So did he. Last I heard, Nicholas moved to Austin. Consulting. Lower profile. Someone told me he's dating a woman in marketing. Someone bright, blonde, 10 years younger. I don't care. Not out of spite, but because the opposite of love isn't hate. It's freedom. The kind of freedom that lets you sleep through the night without checking for texts. That lets you pour your own coffee without waiting for someone to remember how you take it. People always ask if I regret it. The silence, the precision, the finality. I don't, because it wasn't revenge. It was repair, of dignity, of power, of the quiet knowing that I didn't need to destroy anyone to reclaim myself. I just had to stop holding the ladder steady for someone who never looked down to see I was the one keeping him up. Have you ever had to walk away from something you helped build? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever started over, subscribe. There's more to come. I didn't rebuild NeuroSync. I let it go. It was never really mine anymore, not after years of being told I was too clinical, not brandable, not the face we need for this round of funding. Instead, I built something that didn't need a face. A foundation, quiet, clean, and focused. Neuroscience innovation grants for early-stage women-led teams who couldn't get a seat at the table because someone like Nicholas decided they didn't look the part. I funded 3 projects the first quarter. One of them led by a 27-year-old woman from rural Vermont, working on non-invasive seizure mapping. She cried when she got the grant, said no one had ever taken her seriously before. I knew that feeling. That summer, I downsized, sold the brownstone, bought a smaller place outside the city. It has a garden. I wake up early now. I walk barefoot on the porch. No security codes, no cameras, no voices second-guessing what I wear to breakfast. I started cooking again. It was never about food, but about choice. The quiet act of feeding yourself without apology. I read the paper, on actual paper. I underline things. I make notes in the margins, even if no one will ever read them but me. People still ask about him. Some do it gently, how's Nicholas adjusting? Others, not so gently. Was it really necessary to go that far? I never answer with anger. I don't need to. The truth speaks loudest when you don't raise your voice. Nicholas moved to Austin, I heard. He consults, low profile, no longer CEO, no longer keynote speaker. He gives talks in mid-sized rooms with people who don't know he once lost everything to the woman he called a quiet genius, but not strategic. Sometimes I wonder if he's happy. I don't wish him misery, but I do hope he knows what it costs to never say thank you until the door had already closed behind him. I don't miss him, not the way you miss a person. But sometimes I miss the version of myself who believed that love could be enough. That trust would earn you safety. That giving was the highest form of connection. But I've learned something else since then. You can give, but you must also protect. Your energy, your space, your name. You must hold the blueprint of your life like something sacred, not something you hand off to whoever happens to stand beside you. And when you lose yourself to someone else's ambition, you can take her back. Not in rage, not in flames, but in pieces gathered carefully until she becomes whole again. One morning, about 6 months after everything ended, I found an old notebook in the back of my closet. Notes from the early days. Sketches, lists, 1 page with my handwriting in all caps. You know what you're doing. Don't let anyone make you smaller. I sat there on the floor and smiled, because I didn't remember writing it, but I remembered how it felt to need it. Now I don't need it. Now I just live it. I drink strong coffee. I say no without explaining. I mentor young women who think they have to smile to be taken seriously. I tell them you can be kind and still set the boundary. You can be generous and still protect the part of you that no one gets to dim. I tell them there's no prize for staying silent and no shame in walking away from something you helped build when it no longer honors the woman you've become. So if you're reading this, if you're listening, and you've ever had to start over from rubble, from quiet devastation, from a moment when everything you gave was used to build someone else's dream, let me say this. You are not alone. And if you choose to rebuild, don't rebuild smaller out of fear. Rebuild exactly the size your truth needs. And when you do, tell me in the comments and subscribe. We're just getting started.